Welcome. This video is going to cover some of the primary ways to use pots in landscape design. And I've broken it down into four main sections, and I'll also explore just looking at lots of pots. But those four sections are using pots for spatial definition and or punctuation, to soften hardscape, I call it green balance, and also add color. And to define a style, here you can see a very specific character or style. And then the most common one for us, especially residentially, is using pots as a focal point, whether it's bright colors or a really cool pot or the combination thereof. So those are the four main areas we're going to explore. The first area we're going to explore is using pots for spatial definition. And you can see here in the background there's wood benches and people sitting behind this area that's kind of partitioned off by a planter and a group of pots. And then they also use these floating but in a line to control the traffic flow of pedestrians. Here I've used these in a residential space where I want people to move in from the right hand side, and I want that chair there in the background to be a nice anchored spot where there's nobody moving in front of me. So that's an example of how you can use pots to define flow and even the space itself. And the second way is to use them, and here you see them defining the edge of a patio and outdoor seating area, and some other ways. And usually you'll see here also they use them in a rhythm a lot of times, where there's a sequence or a group of pots to kind of accomplish that. Also punctuation. This one has a this is a great example on a corner to soften an otherwise kind of cold concrete building corner, and then adding color and softening to the architecture. So that's an example or examples of using pots for spatial definition. The next way we use pots is for softening hardscape. So in urban settings like this big plaza here, that's very common. They get to kind of a combo deal here. They get to use a style of pot to reinforce the architectural style, but then they also are able to bring in the greenery without having built-in planters. So again, see that a lot commercially. I've run into this a few times in residential design as well. You're about to see an example where we intended to have in-ground planting, and then a footing for the building didn't allow for it. So we improvised and created what I call the pot gallery. And that enabled us to put greenery in there, and also the interest of the pots, and break up that hardscape. So again, green balance is a really important part of landscape design, and softening the hard edges and just the coldness of hardscape is a great way to integrate pots, and then use that opportunity to take it down to a whole other level with color and texture play. The third idea on how to use pots is to define and or support a style. And as a designer, this is a super important part of your overall design strategy. So now it gets into the look of the plants as well as the pot. They're both big players here. Here you see in front of a store that sells kind of contemporary home furnishings. Well, they wanted to give you that vibe even before you got into the store. It kind of telegraphs what it is they're about as a store. So stylistically, they wanted to say a lot up front. These are planters that are in Embarcadero Center in San Francisco, and this place was built in the 70s, I believe. And so even if it's not your taste, they support the style of the building and the architecture around them. And this is more on a personal style of a really cool little fun pot with the succulents, as well as the color and style and pattern on the pot. Here's another one that's very specific and very fun and kind of funky. So that's a lot of what's fun with pots in my world, is that if we've already got a style we're trying to portray and really bring out in the design overall, this is a great opportunity to kind of punctuate that idea, because you can get so specific with the plant types as well as the pots themselves to drive that home. So the last thing I'm going to talk about with pots and using them in landscape design is really the most specific part, and we get a little more detailed. So here's what I mean by that. At this point, it's using pots as a focal point, and especially residentially, this is a very common thing to do. So what I mean is that maybe you only have room for one pot, and it's like a piece of artwork. It's the pot's really cool, the plant's very specific, whatever that is for you, but this is where you get down and it's saying, hey, take a good look at this. This is something special. And whether that's an amazing plant like this one, or whether that's a type of planting, this is where you can have a lot of fun with pots. And for me, I also paint, and I look at some of these compositions, and I've been taking photos of them for years. That's how I was able to put all these together. And whether it's in a commercial setting where they just blow your mind with color and lots of it, or texture play with color, or an amazing pot, or a huge pot with simple plantings. There are just so many ways to do that. And so for me, this is probably the biggest single way that I use pots, is a combination of an interesting pot, but also largely plant driven. I'm a plant designer, and that's my favorite part of what I do, so I think one can really express a lot with very interesting and intricate plant design, and I live in California where that's we have a lot of choices in that regard. And that's one of the things to consider too, is right here we've got in a commercial place, they rotate color. They use color in a very simple pot, but they use color and lots of it to get the impact and get your attention. And in cold weather areas especially, that's a big deal, where they rotate the plant material in and out of these pots to deal with the weather, whatever that happens to be for them. And then that way they have high impact plantings all year long. Fortunately, where I am, I'm more into, I want a longer term plant solution that I don't have to keep going back to. Succulents, I did a whole video on that. Succulents are a nice way to do that. They're low maintenance, they're low water, and they don't grow very quickly, so they allow us to really spread out the interest without messing with the pots very often. So using pots and the plant design as a focal point, that is probably the most useful, or I should say most used way to compose in a landscape design with pots. And I think this is where you could write a whole book. I'm sure there are books on this, but I wanted to just show lots of examples here as I talk over it. Sorry if that's annoying, but some of the things to think about is pot selection. I'm going to show you loads of pots in a moment, and that in itself can be a lot of fun. It's just to track down really cool pots. There's a place called Eye of the Day near Santa Barbara, California, that's one of the largest pot suppliers on the West Coast, and they deliver all over California, but their styles, which you'll see some of in here, are pretty amazing. They get a lot of stuff from Europe. And also it helps capture the flavor of a lot of the architecture here in California. It's not contemporary at all. A lot of it's, again, more ethnic, and I guess would be the way to put it. And then certainly there's catalogs everywhere nowadays. The other thing is the plant selection. So you can go with a really simple plant selection, even monochromatic or a single plant. There's so many cool plants now that you can take one single plant and that's the show, and then put it in a very simple pot and you're done. So it's kind of a limitless way to play with pots in design. But I think the first thing to do is look at these 4 categories and see which one applies to your situation, and then build from there. And again, for resources and so forth for pots, it's really going to be specific to your area, because this is so weather driven in terms of the plant material as well as the type of pots that will even work. I'm going to say a little bit about pots. So if you're in an area that freezes, you need to make sure that you're using a type of pot that can handle that. And a lot of the better clay pots from Europe can handle frost actually, but what we do is we seal the inside of the pot, and there's different ways to seal that, so I'm not going to get into that, but we seal that, then the water does not absorb into the material the pot is made from. And because if the water absorbs into it and then you get a good frost, it expands and it pops whatever that material is, if it's a clay or ceramic type material. So make sure you research what's appropriate for your area weather-wise. And then there's a whole other level of detail about plant selection I won't get into, but I hope this outline of different ways to approach pot design has been helpful, and you see some examples. Myself, I just like to see things, and that inspires me, and I can kind of take it from there. But I wanted to break down some of the thinking behind where do you start, and what are some of the core things to consider when you're designing with pots in the landscape. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please like it. It helps other people find it. And until my next video, enjoy.